The gun was already drawn when Isaac Norris shoved open the door of the corner cabin, and the woman on the other side of it had her own rifle aimed straight between his eyes before he could say a single word. For 3 long seconds, neither of them moved. The lantern on the table threw amber light across her face, and Isaac felt something he had not felt in 11 years of ranging genuine, marrow-deep uncertainty. Not because the rifle barrel was close enough to kiss, though it was. Not because he could see her finger tightening on the trigger, though he could. It was her eyes that stopped him cold. Dark brown, almost black in the low light, burning with a fury that was not simple anger. It was the fury of someone who had been betrayed so many times that trust had become physically painful for her. He recognized that look. He had seen it once in a mirror a long time ago, and he had sworn he would never be the cause of it in another living soul. He lowered his gun first. She did not lower hers. "You have about 4 seconds, she said, voice low and absolutely steady, "to tell me who sent you before I stop being curious." Isaac held his hands wide, the Colt pointing at the cabin floor. "Texas Ranger," he said. "Isaac Norris out of the Uvalde station. I am not here to harm you, ma'am." Something flickered behind those dark eyes. Not relief, more like calculation. "Rangers do not ride out to Redrock Hollow alone at midnight unless someone told them something," she said. "And the last person who told someone something about me is why I am standing in this cabin with a rifle instead of sleeping." Isaac looked at her. He looked at the shadows under her eyes, the dried mud on her boots, the way her left hand was wrapped in a cloth that had gone through brown with dried blood. He looked at the barricaded window behind her, the overturned trunk that had been pushed against the back door, and the cold fireplace with no smoke and no warmth, because she had not wanted anyone outside to see the light. She had been hiding, badly frightened, and still standing. "I was told," he said carefully, "that there was a woman in the corner cabin who had information about the Caldwell outfit. I was told she might need protection. I was not told anything else." She studied him for 5 full seconds. Then she lowered the rifle 2 inches, just 2. "Nobody warned you," she said, almost to herself, in a tone that sounded like the beginning of a very old and very tired joke. "Warn me about what?" he asked. She looked at him for another moment, and something shifted in her expression, not softness, not yet, but a hairline crack in the armor, something that he would spend the next several months trying to earn more of, though he did not know that yet. "Sit down, Ranger," she said. "If you are telling the truth, then we have a problem that is going to take longer than 4 seconds to explain." He sat. She kept the rifle across her knees. And that was how it started, with a gun between them and a secret large enough to bury a county. 3 weeks earlier, Isaac Norris had been in Uvalde, Texas, sitting across a desk from Captain Aldous Webb, who had the look of a man who had been awake for 48 hours and was making everyone else pay for it. It was September of 1883, dry and brutal, the kind of heat that made the limestone walls of the station house sweat. "I have a situation," Webb said, and slid a folded paper across the desk. Isaac unfolded it, a name, a location, and 3 lines of description. The Caldwell outfit, operating out of the Redrock Hollow region of Kinney County, running stolen cattle across the Rio Grande and selling them into Mexico, then running something else back. The word something was underlined. Webb did not know what the return cargo was. That was the problem. "We have a source," Webb said. "A woman. She is living alone in a cabin at the far edge of the Redrock Hollow settlement, the corner cabin they call it, because it sits at the intersection of 2 old wagon roads. She worked for Caldwell. She got out, or she tried to. We got word through a deputy in Brackettville that she has documentation. Letters, ledgers, names, enough to convict." "What is her name?" Isaac asked. "Edna Grady." Isaac wrote it down. "And the risk?" Webb leaned back. "Caldwell knows she left. He does not know what she took with her, not for certain, but he suspects. He has sent men twice. She is still alive, which means she is either very smart or very lucky." "Or both," Isaac said. "Or both," Webb agreed. "I need you to ride out there, secure the evidence, and bring her back to Uvalde under protection." She testifies, "We dismantle the Caldwell operation, and 6 counties from here to the border sleep a little better." Isaac folded the paper and put it in his breast pocket. "I will leave in the morning." Webb stopped him at the door. "Norris, one more thing." "Sir?" Webb looked like he was choosing his words with the care of a man diffusing a blasting cap. "She is not going to trust you easily. She has had reason not to trust men with authority. Handle it carefully." Isaac nodded. He had handled careful situations before. He was good at careful. He rode out the next morning in the gray hour before sunrise, following the Nueces River west, then cutting south through cedar breaks and limestone hills that shimmered in the heat until they looked like something from a fever dream. He passed through 2 small settlements, Bracketville, then a half-dozen buildings that called itself Dry Fork, and asked quiet questions of people who answered them reluctantly. He got a feel for Redrock Hollow before he arrived. A rough place, not lawless exactly, but the kind of place where law was considered a visitor who was tolerated but not encouraged to stay. The Caldwell outfit had money in the area, money that paid for silence. By the time Isaac reached the edge of the hollow, the night had come down hard and fast the way September nights do in South Texas, with a sky full of stars and a wind that smelled of dust and dry cedar. He saw the corner cabin from 200 yards out, small, stone-built, sitting exactly where Webb had described, at the junction of the 2 old roads. No light in the windows, no smoke from the chimney. He had approached carefully, quietly, because he was a ranger and being careful was what kept rangers alive. He had knocked twice on the door and gotten no answer. He had tried the latch and found it locked. He had been in the process of checking the side window when he heard the unmistakable click of a hammer being pulled back inside, and he had made the decision, likely a questionable one, to simply open the front door with his shoulder. Which was how he found himself sitting at a small table across from Edna Grady, her rifle across her knees, both of them breathing the close air of a cabin that smelled of pine resin and dried herbs and something like fear. She told him the story over the next 2 hours, haltingly at first, then with increasing urgency as she seemed to decide, piece by piece, that he was not a threat. Isaac sat still and listened, because listening was another thing rangers were supposed to be good at, and he was. Edna Grady was 27 years old. She had come to Kinney County 4 years earlier as a housekeeper for a ranch family, the Aldrids, who had been decent people. When the Aldrid patriarch died of a fever and the widow could no longer afford staff, Edna had taken the only other work available, which was keeping the accounts and correspondence for a man named Harlan Caldwell, who ran what appeared to be a legitimate cattle brokerage out of a 2-story limestone building in the nearest town. It had taken her 8 months to understand what the legitimate cattle brokerage was actually doing, and another 6 months after that to understand that the return cargo Webb had described with such careful vagueness was people. Men mostly, desperate men coming up from Mexico, crossing the Rio Grande in the dark, paying Caldwell extraordinary sums to be delivered to cities in the east and west where they could disappear. It was not slavery exactly. It was extortion dressed as rescue. Caldwell charged for the passage, charged for the papers he forged, and then charged again when the men were established, demanding silence money with the full understanding that these men had no legal standing to refuse. "I kept his books," Edna said, her hands flat on the table, her voice without any tremor now. "I wrote his letters. I know every name, every transaction, every man he delivered, and every dollar he collected. And when I understood what I was looking at, I copied it all." She paused, "and then I ran." Isaac looked at her hands, the left one, the cloth-wrapped one. "What happened to your hand?" She glanced at it. "One of Caldwell's men found me on the road 3 days ago. I got away." He did not. Isaac noted that she did not elaborate, and he did not ask her to. "Where is the documentation?" "Hidden," she said. "Not here, not in this cabin. I am not going to tell you where it is tonight." He met her eyes. Fair enough. She tilted her head slightly, as if she had expected an argument and was recalibrating because she had not gotten one. "You are not going to insist?" "No," he said. You have survived this long by being careful. I'm not going to ask you to stop being careful just because I showed up with a badge." Silence settled between them. Outside, a night bird called once and went quiet. "The captain," she said finally. "Webb, how long have you worked for him?" "7 years. And you trust him?" "As much as I trust anybody," Isaac said honestly, which is with a reasonable amount of skepticism and an eye on the exits. Something that was almost a smile crossed her face. It lasted less than a second, but Isaac saw it, and he felt it in his chest like a boot in a stirrup, the beginning of forward movement. "I will make you a deal, Ranger Norris," she said. "You stay. Not in this cabin. There is a lean-to around the back where you can sleep without either of us being uncomfortable. You stay for 3 days. If in 3 days I decide you are what you say you are, I will take you to the documentation and we will make whatever arrangement is necessary. And if in 3 days you decide I am not what I say I am," the rifle shifted almost imperceptibly on her knees, "then we will have a different conversation." Isaac Norris was a man who knew when a negotiation had gone as well as it was going to go. 3 days, he said. Agreed. He slept in the lean-to that night on a blanket he had rolled behind his saddle, with his horse tethered nearby and his colt within arm's reach. The night was cool and the stars were thick overhead, and he lay awake for a long time thinking about Webb's warning. She is not going to trust you easily. He had assumed it meant she would be closed off, or hostile, or perhaps a little broken by whatever she had been through. He had not expected someone so precisely and deliberately intact. Edna Grady was not broken. She was like a piece of flint harder for having been struck, edges sharper, and capable of throwing a spark under the right conditions. He did not know what to do with that observation, so he put it aside and went asleep. In the morning she was up before him. He came around the cabin to find a small fire going outside. She had judged it safe in daylight with a pot of coffee and a pan of cornbread. She handed him a tin cup without ceremony and went back to what she was doing, which was studying a folded paper with the focused intensity of someone solving a problem they had been working on for a long time. Isaac drank the coffee. It was very good, he said so. "I was a housekeeper before I was a bookkeeper," she said without looking up. "Mrs. Aldred taught me that good coffee was not a luxury, it was a form of respect." "She sounds like a sensible woman." She was. Edna folded the paper and tucked it into her coat. "She died in April, pneumonia." A pause. "She was the last person who was kind to me before all of this." Isaac did not offer condolences of the quick and dismissive kind. He just nodded, and they sat with the fact of it for a moment in the morning light, which felt like the right thing to do. Over those 3 days, they developed a careful routine that was built, Isaac would later think, on the same principle as building a bridge. You extend it out from both sides until the gap closes in the middle, and the moment it does is not dramatic. It just suddenly holds weight. She tested him in small ways. She told him something that was partially false, a detail about the road to Brackettville that was wrong, and watched to see if he corrected it from his own knowledge or accepted it without question. He corrected it. She noted this without comment and adjusted her assessment of him upward by some private increment. He tested her too, though not deliberately. He had grown up in Austin, the son of a circuit court judge, and he had absorbed without knowing it a certain instinct for when a story had holes and when it did not. Edna's story had no holes. Every name connected to another name, every date corresponded to something verifiable, every detail of Caldwell's operation fit into the pattern of a real criminal enterprise operating in real geography. She was telling the truth, all of it. On the evening of the second day, they were sitting outside the cabin, she on the step, he on an overturned crate, watching the last of the sun go red behind the limestone hills. She had been quiet for a long time in the comfortable way of people who have stopped performing comfort and are simply being it. "Can I ask you something personal?" he said. "You can ask. Why did you stay as long as you did, once you understood what Caldwell was doing?" She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Because I was building the case. I could have left the moment I understood, but leaving meant he kept doing it. If I stayed and documented it properly, there was a chance of stopping it. She paused. Also, I had nowhere to go. I will not pretend that was not part of it. That takes courage, Isaac said. Both things at once. She turned and looked at him directly for the first time that evening. Don't make it something noble, she said. I was also terrified every single day. Noble things are done without terror. What I did was just surviving sideways. Isaac thought that was one of the most accurate descriptions of a certain kind of bravery he had ever heard. He did not say so because he did not think she wanted to be studied just then. He looked back at the sunset instead and said, I understand that. Something in his voice must have carried more weight than he intended because she looked at him again. Do you? He considered how much to say. My father was a judge, he said. He was also, for most of my childhood, a drunk. Not the falling down kind. The quiet, contained kind, where every morning you wonder which version is going to be at the breakfast table, and you become very good at reading the room and very bad at trusting that the ground is solid under your feet. He paused. So I became a ranger, because the law was the one thing I had watched my whole life be both the best and worst of what men do, and I thought if I got close enough to it, I could figure out how to make it the best more often. Edna was very still, listening. I did not figure it out, he added, but I am still trying. How old are you? She asked, and there was something direct and uncomplicated about the question that he found refreshing. 32. She seemed to file this away. You look older. 7 years of ranging will do that. You look tired, she amended, with what he thought might have been a degree of concern in her voice. Not old, tired. I am tired, he admitted, but not of this, not of what I am doing here. They looked at each other in the fading light, and Isaac became aware of something happening in the space between them that he had not accounted for and did not have a procedure for. Something that felt less like professional respect and more like recognition. The particular recognition that comes from understanding that another person has been through something hard and has come out the other side of it still fundamentally themselves, and that is a kind of miracle worth noting. He looked away first. She looked away shortly after. They went inside, she to the cabin and he to the lean-to, and he lay awake again thinking things he put firmly aside because he had a job to do. On the morning of the third day, Edna said, I will take you to the documentation. Isaac had his horse saddled and ready in 20 minutes. She took a different route than he expected, heading north first through dense cedar, then cutting east along the dry bed of a creek, walking her own horse, a patient sorrel mare she called Fen, with the ease of someone who had made this trip before and knew every rock and root of it. They rode mostly in silence, but it was the silence of two people thinking about the same problem from different angles. After an hour, she stopped at a cluster of large limestone boulders near a dry waterfall and dismounted. She moved 3 specific rocks from a crevice with practiced efficiency, and from the hollow behind them pulled a canvas satchel wrapped in oilcloth. She handed it to Isaac. He opened it carefully. Inside were letters, 40 or 50 of them bound in groups by thin cord. Beside them a leather ledger book, its pages close-written in a neat, precise hand. And beneath those a separate folded document, a handwritten list of names. 23 names, each with a date and a dollar amount beside it. Isaac looked at the list for a long time. Then he looked at Edna. This is everything Webb thought it would be, he said quietly. And then some. I know, she said. She was watching him read with the expression of someone who has carried something heavy for so long that seeing it put down, even briefly, is almost disorienting. The names on the list. Those are the men Caldwell transported. They are also witnesses, Isaac said. Yes, she paused. I thought about that. I thought about trying to reach them myself, but I could not do it alone, and every day I stayed connected to those men, I was also making them targets. You made the right call, he said. Getting this to us is the fastest way to protect them. She looked at him steadily. Promise me something, Ranger Norris. I will promise you what I can. Promise me that when this goes to court, those men are treated as witnesses, not as criminals. They paid Caldwell for passage. They were extorted. They are not the guilty parties here. I give you my word, Isaac said. and I will put it in the report in terms that leave no room for reinterpretation." She held his gaze for a moment, measuring. Then she nodded. "All right," she said. "Let us go to Uvalde." They rode back to the cabin to pack what she needed, which was not much: a small trunk of clothes, a wooden box she did not open in front of him, her rifle, and a book. He noted the book because she held it with a degree of care that suggested it mattered to her. It was, he saw when she tucked it into her saddlebag, a volume of essays by Ralph Waldo Emerson. "Interesting choice for a journey," he said. He believed that self-reliance was a form of sacred trust, she said. "I find it comforting in situations where I am being asked to rely on someone else." Isaac thought that was either a challenge or an invitation to earn something. He decided to treat it as the latter. They left Redrock Hollow mid-morning and rode north, aiming to make Brackettville before dark and Uvalde the following day. The first hour was uneventful, the limestone hills rolling past under a blue sky that was beginning to cloud at the edges with the suggestion of a coming weather change. It was Edna who saw them first. She pulled Fenn to a stop so suddenly that Isaac, riding half a length behind, nearly ran into her. "Riders," she said quietly. "4 of them, coming up from the south draw." Isaac had his hand on his Colt before she finished the sentence. He looked where she was looking. The riders were still a quarter-mile out, but moving at a pace that was not casual. "Caldwell's men. I recognize the gray horse on the left," she said. "That is Del Munro. He is the one who caught me on the road." The one whose hand she had gotten away from, the one she had not elaborated about. "Can we get ahead of them?" Isaac asked. "Not on this road. They will cut us off at the creek crossing." She was already scanning the terrain with the practical efficiency of someone who had been studying escape routes for weeks. "North Ridge. If we go straight up through the cedar, we can get above them and they lose the angle. That is rough country for the horses." "Yes," she said, and was already turning Fenn off the road. He followed. The horses scrambled up the rocky hillside through thick cedar that caught at their legs and tore at their clothing. But the animals were willing, and the slope, though steep, was not impossible. They gained the ridge in 8 minutes that felt considerably longer, and Isaac turned to look back down. The 4 riders had reached the road junction below and stopped. He could see them conferring, gesturing. One of them, the man on the gray horse, looked up toward the ridge with a stillness that suggested he had more experience with tracking than Isaac would have liked. "We need to move," Isaac said quietly. "Now and fast." They rode the ridge hard, the horses' hooves loud on limestone. Below and behind, Isaac heard shouting and then the sound of horses climbing. Munro had taken the angle. He was good. They rode for 20 minutes along the ridge before Edna found what she was looking for: a descent on the north side that was steep but manageable, dropping into a narrow canyon that the riders behind them could not follow without losing significant time. She took it without hesitation, and Isaac followed, his horse blowing hard and his heart keeping pace with it. In the canyon she pulled up and listened. Nothing. The sound of pursuit had faded. She turned to him. There was color high in her cheeks from the riding, and her dark hair had come loose from its pins, and she was breathing hard, and this was something Isaac registered with a completely inappropriate degree of clarity given the circumstances. The most vivid person he had ever been in a canyon with. He focused on the problem. "We cannot go back to the main road," he said. "If Munro knows these hills, he knows where the road comes out." "There is another way," she said. "Longer. It comes out above Brackettville, not below it. We will not make it by nightfall. We will camp then, in a canyon in September with 4 of Caldwell's riders in the hills," she said, and it was not quite sarcasm, more like someone identifying the pieces of a puzzle that had very few good solutions. "Yes," Isaac said, "but we have the high ground information and they do not know this canyon." "I know this canyon," she said. "Then we are ahead." They made camp in a sheltered bend of the canyon, where an overhang of rock provided cover from above, and the narrow walls made approach from either end visible long in advance. Isaac built a fire small enough to provide warmth without throwing light above the canyon walls, and they ate from his saddlebags dried beef, hardtack, and the last of the coffee, and sat across from each other in the glow of it. Edna had her Emerson in her hands but was not reading. She was staring at the small fire with an expression that was doing its best to be composed and not entirely succeeding. "You are safe tonight," Isaac said. "I know," she said. And then more quietly, "That is actually the strange part. I have been alone in that cabin for 3 weeks being afraid and She stopped. "You what?" She looked up at him. "I feel safer with you than I have felt since this started, and I do not entirely know what to do with that." Isaac held very still, the way you hold still when a wild thing comes to your hand, and you do not want to startle it away. "You do not have to do anything with it," he said. "Just let it be true." She looked at him for a long moment, and whatever she found in his expression seemed to settle something in her, because the tension in her shoulders released by a degree that he noticed and she probably did not. "Tell me something true," she said. "Not about the case, about you." Isaac thought about it. "When I was 12, he said, "I found an injured hawk in the cedar breaks behind my father's house. I kept it for 2 weeks, fed it mice from the barn, cleaned the wound in its wing every day. When it was well enough to fly, I opened the cage and it sat there for a full minute looking at me before it left. My father told me that proved hawks were ungrateful." He paused. "I thought it proved they took their time deciding things." Edna was quiet for a moment. "What happened to your father?" "He died when I was 22, liver failure." He paused. "I was sorry. I was also relieved. I was ashamed of the relief for a long time." "You should not have been," she said quietly. "Both things can be true at once." "Yes," he said, looking at her. "Both things can be true at once." The fire popped and sent a spiral of sparks upward into the dark. The canyon was absolutely still around them except for the occasional movement of the horses and the distant searching sound of a coyote somewhere on the hills above. "What is in the wooden box?" he asked. She glanced at her saddlebag where the box was stowed. "Letters," she said. "From my sister. She lives in San Antonio. I have not seen her in 4 years." A pause. "She does not know any of this. She thinks I am still working for a cattle broker." "After this is over," he said, "you will be able to go to San Antonio." "After this is over," she repeated, as if the concept was foreign to her. "I have been so consumed with surviving the middle of it that I keep forgetting there will be an end." "There will be," he said, "and it will be a good one." She looked at him with an expression that was complex enough to deserve a longer look than he allowed himself, and then she said, "You are very sure of things for a man who said he was still trying to figure them out." "I am sure of some things," he said. "The things I can control." "And the things you cannot control." He held her gaze. "I am learning to be less afraid of those." They slept in shifts, one watching while the other rested, and the night passed without incident. In the morning, gray and close with the weather that had been threatening, they rode the canyon north until it opened into a wide valley, and by midday they were descending toward Bracketville through country that smelled of rain that had not arrived yet. They found the deputy in Bracketville, a solid, cautious man named Pryor who had been expecting them, or rather expecting something, and Isaac sent a telegraph to Webb from the station there. He did not detail the situation, because telegraph operators talked, but he used the word secured and proceeding that Webb would understand. Pryor put them up for the night. Edna slept in the deputy's guest room and Isaac slept on the station house floor, and the 4 riders from the hills did not appear, which meant either they had given up the pursuit or they were going back to Caldwell with the information that Edna Grady was heading for Uvalde with a ranger. Isaac thought about that possibility in the dark and was not pleased by it. He made a decision. In the morning, before Edna was awake, he spoke to Pryor. "The direct road to Uvalde," he said. "If Caldwell hears we are coming, that is the road he will cover." Pryor agreed. "There is a mail route," he said, "longer by a day, but it passes through 3 small settlements. Harder to set up an ambush. We will take the mail route." When Edna came out to find the horses being prepared for a different direction, she raised an eyebrow. Isaac explained. She thought for a moment, then nodded. "Good thinking," she said, with a simplicity that pleased him more than elaborate praise would have. The mail route took them through a landscape of mesquite grassland and shallow creek valleys, past settlements with names like Pin Oak and Cottonmouth Springs, where the mail rider knew everyone and everyone knew the mail rider, and the presence of two travelers, a woman and a ranger, was noted with the mild curiosity of people who had better things to do than make trouble. On the second day of the mail route, the weather finally broke, and the rain came down in the long, steady way of Texas September rain, turning the roads to mud and reducing visibility to the length of a good throw. They took shelter for 2 hours in a barn at Cottonmouth Springs whose owner, an elderly woman named Mrs. Hatch, pressed coffee and fresh-baked bread on them with the cheerful insistence of someone who genuinely enjoyed the company and did not get enough of it. Edna helped Mrs. Hatch wash dishes while Isaac checked the horses, and when he came back into the barn, dry and smelling of hay, he heard them talking through the kitchen window. Mrs. Hatch was asking about the journey, and Edna was answering in terms that were accurate but carefully edited, and there was in her voice a warmth and ease that Isaac had not heard before. She was good with people when she was safe. She lit up around people who were not a threat, and the quality of light she produced was. Isaac stood in the barn and listened and decided he was developing a problem. He had been warned, technically. Webb had warned him. She is not going to trust you easily. Nobody had warned him what would happen when she did. They reached Uvalde on the 4th day of traveling in the late afternoon, when the sun was back out and everything was still wet, and the town smelled of cedar and mud and horses. Captain Webb met them at the station house, shook Isaac's hand, and nodded at Edna with the careful respect of a man who knew something of what she had gone through. "Miss Grady," he said, "Texas owes you a considerable debt." Edna put the canvas satchel on his desk without ceremony. "The debt can be paid by doing something effective with what is in there," she said. Webb opened the satchel, looked at the contents briefly, and looked up with the expression of a man who had just seen something that would substantially improve his week. "Where will you be staying?" he asked. "I had not thought past getting here," she said. Webb looked at Isaac. Isaac said, "There is a boarding house on the main street. Mrs. Calloway runs it. She is a good woman and it is a respectable establishment." "I will have the department cover the cost," Webb said to Edna, "until the matter is resolved. The trial preparation will require you to be available for the district attorney." Edna absorbed this. "How long?" 2 months, perhaps 3, she nodded. She was very tired, Isaac saw. The kind of tired that comes when the crisis has ended and the body finally admits to everything it has been ignoring. He walked her to the boarding house himself. Mrs. Calloway, who was everything he had said she was, a broad-faced, capable woman of 50 with a direct manner and a warm kitchen, showed Edna to a room and brought her water for washing and said dinner would be at 6. Edna thanked her in the particular way of someone who was not accustomed to being taken care of and was recalibrating. At the door of the boarding house, Isaac stopped. Edna turned to face him. They had spent 4 days riding together, sleeping in shifts in a canyon, dodging Caldwell's men, and eating hardtack and the occasional piece of decent bread from roadside kitchens. And now they were standing on a wooden boardwalk in Uvalde with the problem solved and the immediate danger past, and there was a particular awkwardness that comes when the emergency is over and two people have to figure out what they are to each other in ordinary circumstances. "Thank you," she said, "for the last 4 days." "You did most of it," he said. "I just kept up." That almost smile again, and this time it lasted longer. "You kept up very well," she said. He took his hat off and turned it in his hands, which was something he did not usually do, having spent 11 years training himself out of nervous habits. "Miss Grady," he said, "I will need to file a full report tomorrow and likely meet with the district attorney's office within the week. There will be things they need to ask you. It will not be comfortable." "I know," she said. "If at any point the process becomes," he searched for the word, "if it becomes something other than what it should be, I want you to tell me. I made you a promise at those rocks. I intend to keep it." She looked at him with those dark eyes and the exhaustion in them and something else, something quiet and watchful and not quite ready to name itself. "I believe you," she said. It was 3 words, and they were simply said, and they landed in him like something very clean and very important. "Good night, Ranger Norris. Good night, Miss Grady." He walked back to the station house in the long evening light and filed his preliminary report, and went to his rented room above the hardware store and lay on his back staring at the ceiling with the distinct and uncomfortable awareness that nobody had warned him about any of this, and he was not entirely sure what to do about it. He went to see her the next morning professionally to discuss the report, and the morning after that to bring word from Webb about the district attorney's timeline, and the morning after that, with no official reason at all, which he addressed by bringing a copy of that morning's newspaper, and the suggestion that Mrs. Calloway's dining room would be a good place to discuss it. And Edna said yes in the manner of someone who has also been thinking about things and has also not entirely resolved them. They ate breakfast together in Mrs. Calloway's bright dining room and read the newspaper and discussed the matters of the day, and Isaac noticed that she had opinions about everything, and that her opinions were always backed by actual reasoning, and that the reasoning was always interesting and sometimes surprising, and he found himself inventing positions just to hear her argue against them. She caught on to this within a week. "You do not actually believe that," she said one morning, looking at him over her coffee with the particular sharpness of someone who has been paying close attention. "How do you know?" he asked. "Because you said the opposite thing 3 days ago and believed it then," she said. "You are disagreeing with me on purpose. You are very good at arguing," he said. "I know," she said, and this time the almost smile was a real one, full and sudden, and it went through Isaac like a plucked string. He was in serious trouble, and he knew it, and he did not do anything about it because he was not sure what he would do, and because the situation had structural complications that made impulsiveness unwise. He was the ranger on her case. She was under departmental protection. There was a trial coming that would require her trust in the law to remain uncomplicated by anything personal. He told himself all of this. He also walked her to the district attorney's office twice a week and waited outside while she was interviewed. And on the days those interviews were particularly grueling, he had supper with her at the boarding house and listened to her decompress. And once, on an evening when the district attorney's questions had been especially intrusive, and she had come out with a stillness around her mouth that he recognized as the aftermath of maintained composure, he said, "You do not have to be all right tonight if you are not." She had looked at him and then looked away and then said, in a voice stripped of all its careful management, "I am so tired of being strong, Isaac." It was the first time she had used his given name. He reached across the table and put his hand over hers on the tablecloth, just that. She did not pull away. She turned her hand over and held his, and they sat like that for a while in the lantern light of Mrs. Calloway's dining room, and something that had been building for weeks arrived very quietly at the surface between them. "You are allowed to be tired," he said. "The strength is still there. It does not go away just because you set it down for an evening." She let out a breath that was very nearly a sob and was absolutely not, because she would not allow it to be, which was exactly the kind of choice he had come to understand was fundamental to who she was. "What happens after the trial?" she said very quietly. "You are free," he said. "You go wherever you want to go." "I do not know where I want to go," she said. "I have been so focused on the immediate problem that I have not—" She stopped. "I have been in crisis for a year and a half. I do not know what ordinary life looks like for me anymore." Isaac thought about this carefully. He was sitting with her hand in his and the lamp burning warm between them and the sound of the street outside and the complete absence of any professional reason for any of this. And he thought, this is the moment where I either say something true or I do not. "I would like to be part of figuring it out," he said, "if that is something you would want." She was very still. "Not because of the case," he said. "The case is what it is, and I will do my job regardless of anything personal. But yes. Personally, I would like—" He stopped and collected himself and said it plainly, "I would like to know you outside of this." Edna looked at him for a long time. The calculation that had been there that first night in the cabin was there again, but different now, not self-protective calculation, but the kind that happens when something you had not let yourself want becomes suddenly, tentatively possible. "Ask me again," she said. "After the trial." He could have pushed. He did not. "After the trial," he agreed. The trial of Harlan Caldwell commenced in the second week of November, before a circuit court judge who had been brought in specifically to avoid any possibility of local influence. The courtroom was packed and tense, and the Caldwell organization made 3 separate attempts in the 2 weeks prior to the trial to delay or derail proceedings, 2 of which involved pressuring witnesses, and 1 of which involved a man in a dark coat appearing outside the boarding house at midnight and standing in the street below Edna's window until Isaac, who had placed himself in the shadow of the doorway across the street because he had not trusted the night and had been right not to, walked out and made a quiet but extremely clear case for why the man should go home. The man went home. Isaac stayed in the doorway until dawn. He did not tell Edna about it until later, and she received the information with a look that contained, alongside the predictable alarm and gratitude, something else. Something that was about him, specifically. In the courtroom, Edna Grady was extraordinary. Isaac sat in the observer's gallery and watched her answer the district attorney's questions in a clear, steady voice, with the ledger and letters laid out before her, and every name and date and amount accounted for. Caldwell's lawyer tried every angle he had. She deflected each one with the precision of someone who had spent 4 years keeping meticulous records and knew those records down to the last line. When it was over, when the jury had returned its verdict on the 3rd day and Harlan Caldwell had been led from the courtroom with a conviction on multiple counts of fraud, extortion, and conspiracy, Edna walked out of the courthouse into the November afternoon and stopped on the step and looked at the sky. Isaac came to stand beside her. "It is done," she said. "It is done," he confirmed. She breathed in and breathed out, and he watched the particular unwinding that happens when someone puts down a weight they have been carrying long enough that the relief is almost indistinguishable from exhaustion. He had been patient for 8 weeks. He had been professional and careful and present in the ways that were allowed and absent in the ways that were appropriate. He had brought her newspapers and walked beside her to appointments and listened when she needed to be heard. He had been, by any measure, exceedingly good and rather quietly miserable about it. "You said to ask you after the trial," he said. She turned her head to look at him. She was wearing a gray wool coat against the November chill, and her dark hair was pinned properly, as it was on court days, and she looked composed and sure of herself in the way she always did, and also, watching him, as though she was holding her breath. "Would you walk with me?" he said. "Not anywhere official. Not anywhere that has anything to do with any of this. Just walk with me." She took his arm. They walked. They walked along the Nueces River Road south of town, where the pecan trees were dropping their last leaves and the water was low and clear, and the afternoon was bright and cold and absolutely quiet. They walked for a long time without saying much, the way you do when words feel both necessary and insufficient. Finally she said, "I wrote to my sister last week." "What did you tell her?" "Everything," she said, "all of it from the beginning." A pause. "And I told her about you." Isaac looked at her. "What did you tell her about me?" Edna looked at the river. "I told her I had met someone who was impossibly patient and occasionally infuriating, and who had a habit of looking at me as though he was trying to memorize me, and that I did not know what to do about him." "What did she say?" "She said that if I did not know what to do about him, that was probably an indication that I did." A very brief pause. "She is annoyingly sensible." Isaac stopped walking. She stopped with him because their arms were linked and there was nowhere to go that was not together. "Edna," he said. She looked up at him. "I have been trying very hard to be professional and appropriate and not to complicate your situation," he said. "And I am going to stop doing that right now and tell you that I have not stopped thinking about you since the morning after I arrived at your cabin and you handed me a cup of coffee without ceremony. and told me that good coffee was a form of respect, and that in 32 years of living, I have never met anyone I wanted to know more than I want to know you." Edna was quiet for a moment that lasted long enough for him to wonder if he had miscalculated badly. Then she said, "Isaac, yes, stop talking." And she reached up and put her hand against his jaw and kissed him, and the pecan trees rustled overhead, and the river ran quiet and cold, and the afternoon held very still around them, and it was the most uncomplicated and most certain thing that had happened to either of them in longer than either could easily remember. When they separated, eventually, after a moment that required no footnotes, she stayed close, her hand still against his face, and looked at him. "I want to go to San Antonio," she said, "to see my sister for Christmas." "I will take you," he said immediately. "You do not have to." "I know," he said. "I want to." She studied him. "You are going to be very stubborn about being good to me, are you not?" "Entirely possible," he said. She smiled. The real one, the full one, the one that went through him like that plucked string, and it lasted this time. It did not disappear. He decided then and there that one of the ongoing purposes of his life was going to be making that smile appear as often as possible. They walked back to town in the fading afternoon light with their arms still linked, and arrived at the boarding house door where Mrs. Calloway, who had been watching the situation develop for 8 weeks with the satisfaction of a woman who sees things coming long before the people involved do, gave them both a look that managed to convey absolute triumph without a single word. December came to Uvalde with hard frosts and bright skies, and the particular quality of Texas winter light that turns everything sharp and gold. Isaac arranged his leave with Webb, who raised one eyebrow and said, "San Antonio," and Isaac said, "Her sister lives there," and Webb said, "Naturally," in a tone that suggested he was very pleased with himself for something. They made the journey to San Antonio in a hired coach, 3 days of travel through country that turned gradually from limestone cedar breaks to the broader, more settled landscape of the Texas hill country, the roads improving as they went, the small towns coming more frequently. They talked for most of it, the uninterrupted, wide-ranging kind of conversation that happens when two people discover they have a lifetime's worth of things to say to each other, and no particular urgency about finishing. She told him about growing up in Missouri, the youngest of 3 daughters, her father a schoolteacher and her mother a reader of everything she could get her hands on, the household full of books and argument and very little money and considerable happiness. She told him about coming to Texas at 23, seeking something larger than what Missouri had offered, finding the Aldred position, and the years of decent steady work before everything became something else. He told her about Austin, about his father the judge and his mother who had been quietly fierce and had died young, about the years of studying law that he had abandoned for ranging, because he discovered that he was better on horseback in open country than he was in a room full of papers. He told her about the 11 years of cases, the ones that had gone well and the ones that had not, the accumulated weight of all of it, and the way the work still mattered to him regardless. She asked him once, in the second day's traveling when the hill country was rolling past outside the coach windows, and the afternoon was soft and warm for December, "Do you ever think about stopping? Ranging, I mean. Doing something else?" He considered it honestly. "More lately," he said. "What would you do?" "I am not sure," he said. "I know how to track and how to read a situation and how to talk to people who do not necessarily want to talk to me. There are other ways to use those things." "There are," she agreed. She was watching him with the attentive quality she had, the quality of someone who listens not just to what you say but to the space around it. "You could practice law. You studied it." "I could," he said. "In a town that needed it," she said, and she said it as though she was proposing a picture and waiting to see if he saw the same picture. He looked at her. "What town?" he said. She did not answer directly. She looked out the window at the hills rolling by and said, "I have been thinking about where I want to be, now that the trial is over, now that I have options." "What are you thinking?" She looked back at him. "I am thinking that I would like to be somewhere that feels like it can be a home, not a temporary arrangement, not a place I stay until the next crisis, a real place. She paused. And I am thinking that where feels less important than who. Isaac's hands were still on his knees and his heart was doing something entirely undignified. Edna, he said, I am not proposing anything, she said quickly. I am just thinking out loud. You can think out loud all you want, he said. It is one of my favorite things about you. She looked at him for a moment, then laughed, a real laugh, free and unguarded, and he stored it away with the smile and the sound of her voice saying both things can be true at once, and he thought this was a collection he intended to spend a great deal of time adding to. Her sister, Clara, met them at the stage office in San Antonio on a clear, cold afternoon. A woman a few years older than Edna with the same dark eyes and considerably more tendency toward immediate warmth. She embraced Edna with the intensity of 4 years compressed into a moment, and then looked at Isaac with an expression that was measuringly kind. "The Ranger," she said. "Isaac Norris," he said, and shook her hand. "Clara Whitfield," she said. "My husband is at the shop. We have a mercantile. He will be home for supper." She looked him over once more with the frank assessment of a sister. "Good," she said, apparently concluding something to her satisfaction, and took Edna's arm and led her away, and Isaac followed with the bags. Christmas in San Antonio in 1883 was warm compared to Uvalde, and Clara's household was the kind of household that Edna had described her parents' home as being full and talkative and easy with affection. Clara's husband, Robert Whitfield, was a broad-shouldered former farmer turned merchant who shook Isaac's hand with genuine force and decided by the second meal that they were friends, which was a verdict Isaac was entirely comfortable with. He watched Edna in that house and felt something that he recognized, after reflection, as awe. She was different here, not a different person, but a fuller version of the same one. The way a piece of music heard through a wall and then heard in a proper hall is recognizably the same piece, but suddenly its actual size. She laughed freely. She argued with Clara about books with the comfortable ferocity of a lifelong habit. She helped in the kitchen and sat in the parlor and read to Clara's 2 small children, a boy of 4 and a girl of 2, in the evenings, Emerson and fairy tales mixed without apparent priority. On Christmas Eve, after the children were in bed and Clara and Robert had gone up, Edna and Isaac sat by the parlor fire, and it was quiet and warm, and he looked at her in the firelight and thought, "This, whatever version of this can be made permanent, this is what I want." He pulled a small box from his coat pocket. He had bought it in Uvalde from the jeweler on the main street on a morning 3 weeks ago when he had known and had decided that waiting for a better moment was a way of not deserving the one he had. Edna looked at the box, then at him, then back at the box. "Isaac," she said. "I know," he said, "that the timing could be argued. I know we have known each other for 3 months. I know there are people who would say, Isaac," she said again with a firmness that stopped him. "Yes. Stop talking," she said, which was what she had said at the river, and he felt the same warmth of it now amplified. He opened the box. A simple gold ring, slim and plain, the jeweler having understood without excessive direction what he was looking for. "I am not going to make a speech," he said. "I am just going to say that I want to be wherever you are, and I want to build something real with you, and I think you are the most remarkable person I have met in 32 years. And I intend to spend a considerable number of additional years confirming that opinion if you will allow me to." Edna looked at the ring. She looked at him. Her eyes were bright in the firelight. "Yes," she said. One word simply said, and it landed in him exactly the way 3 words had landed weeks ago, clean and true and certain. He slid the ring on her finger. She looked at it for a moment, then leaned forward and kissed him, gentle and warm, and the fire crackled, and the house was quiet around them, and Christmas morning was a few hours away. Clara found out at breakfast, and made a sound of such intense vindicated satisfaction that Robert asked her what she had won. "A bet with myself," she said firmly, and embraced her sister for a long time while Isaac and Robert stood back and watched with the easy understanding of two men, in the presence of a reunion that was large enough to require space. They were married in January in Uvalde, in the small stone church on the corner of the main street, with Captain Webb present and Mrs. Calloway and Deputy Pryor from Bracketville, who had made the 2-day journey, because he had told his wife about the ranger and the woman in the corner cabin, and she had told him that if he did not attend the wedding, she would be seriously displeased with him. Clara and Robert made the journey from San Antonio, and Clara cried, and Robert shook Isaac's hand so firmly that Isaac would feel it for an hour afterward. Edna wore a dress of deep blue wool, made by Clara's seamstress in San Antonio, and she carried no flowers because it was January, and she had said, when Clara suggested them, that she did not need them. She looked, walking down the short aisle of the stone church to where Isaac stood, like someone arriving at a place she had been heading toward for a long time without knowing it. He watched her come toward him and thought, "Nobody warned me. They really did not warn me about any of this." He thought it with complete gratitude. After the ceremony, Webb took Isaac aside briefly while Edna was surrounded by Clara and Mrs. Calloway, and said, in the gruff, direct manner of a man who reserved warmth for specific occasions and made it count when he deployed it, "You did good work on the Caldwell case, Norris, and I think you know that what you did after it was considerably more important." Isaac looked across the room at his wife, who was laughing at something Clara had said. "Yes," he said, "I do." They settled in Uvalde. Isaac applied for admission to the Texas bar and was accepted on the basis of his prior legal study and 7 years of practical experience that had given him a working knowledge of evidence and procedure that most practicing attorneys would have recognized and respected. He opened a small law office in the building next to the stage company, with his name on the door in plain lettering. Edna went to work with the district attorney's office as a records clerk, because she had proved during the Caldwell case that her capacity for documentation and organization was exceptional, and the district attorney, a sensible man named Calhoun, had the wit to recognize exceptional when he saw it and make use of it. She also resumed corresponding with several of the men from Caldwell's list, the 23 men who had been transported and extorted. She did this on her own time and her own initiative, working with Calhoun's office and with a civil attorney in San Antonio to establish whether any of those men had grounds for restitution from the assets Caldwell had forfeited. 3 of them did. Calhoun saw to it that the process worked as it should. Edna tracked every step of it. When the last of those 3 cases was settled, in April of 1884, Calhoun called her into his office and told her she had done work that most trained attorneys would have been proud of, and offered her a formal position as an investigative clerk with a proper salary. She accepted. She told Isaac that evening over dinner. They had rented a house on the east side of town, a limestone house with a good kitchen garden and a front porch that caught the evening breeze. And he listened to her tell it with the particular joy of watching someone step fully into themselves. "You know," she said, "6 months ago I was hiding in a cabin with a rifle across my knees. And now you are dismantling criminal operations from behind a desk," he said. "The rifle across the knees was more dramatic. The desk is more effective," she said. "Yes," he agreed. "It is." She reached across the table and took his hand, as she had done in Mrs. Calloway's dining room on that evening weeks and months, and what felt like a different life ago. And this time it was different because there was no uncertainty in it, just the simple, solid fact of 2 people who had found each other in difficult country and decided to stay. In the autumn of 1884, Edna told him she was expecting a child. She told him in the kitchen on a Tuesday morning, very simply and directly, in the manner of someone reporting a fact that she is still integrating and would like company in doing so. Isaac set down his coffee cup. He looked at her. He said, "Edna." "Yes," she said. "Are you all right?" "I am very well," she said. I am surprised, and she stopped. Her eyes were very bright. I am happy, she said, and it sounded like a discovery. I did not know that was going to be my reaction until just now. He came around the table and held her for a long time in the morning light, and she held him back with the arms that had kept a rifle steady in a dark cabin, and carried a canvas satchel full of evidence through limestone hills, and turned pages of Emerson at a campfire in a canyon. And he thought that whatever child grew up with those arms around them would know, from the beginning, what it meant to be strong and what it meant to be safe at the same time. Clara came from San Antonio in the spring. She arrived 2 weeks before the baby was due and took over the house with the cheerful efficiency of someone who had done this before and enjoyed it, reorganizing the kitchen to her satisfaction and filling the front rooms with conversation and laughter. The baby arrived on a clear May morning in 1885, with Dr. Pemberton in attendance and Isaac in the kitchen being completely useless and very intensely there. The baby was a boy. He was small and loud and had Edna's dark eyes from the first moment. And when Dr. Pemberton carried him in to his father, Isaac held him with the careful awe of a man holding something he had not fully imagined until it was in his arms. Edna from the bed watched him hold their son and said, in a voice still rough from the effort of the morning, "What do you want to name him?" "I thought you might have an opinion," he said. "I do," she said. "Thomas, after your father." Isaac looked up at her. "My father was not a good man. He was a complicated man," she said, "and he made you, and you are a good man, so Thomas seems right to me. Thomas gets a better version of the name." Isaac looked at his son. "Thomas Norris," he said. The baby made a sound of profound indifference, and Isaac thought it was perfect. Clara stayed for another 3 weeks and then went back to San Antonio, and life settled into the rhythm of a household with a new baby, which is to say a rhythm that bears no resemblance to any previous rhythm and requires constant renegotiation. Edna went back to work with Calhoun's office in September, bringing Thomas to the office on days when the woman she had engaged to help with him was unavailable, which Calhoun tolerated with the resignation of a man who had made his peace with an exceptional employee's exceptional circumstances. The cases she worked on in those years were smaller than the Caldwell case, but no less important: fraudulent land claims, extortion of small farmers, the kind of persistent low-level crime that ate at the edges of communities and needed patient, meticulous attention. Isaac built his law practice steadily. He took cases that needed taking: boundary disputes, inheritance matters, the occasional defense of a man who was poor enough to need a lawyer and smart enough to know it. He argued in front of the same circuit court judge who had presided over the Caldwell case, who had by this point developed a healthy respect for Isaac's methods and a mild exasperation with his tendency to make straightforward cases interesting. They were, by any measure, happy. Not the performed happiness of people who have decided to be content with what they have, but the lived happiness of people who are genuinely interested in their lives and each other, and who have, both of them, been through enough darkness that the light is not something they take for granted. They fought, sometimes. She was formidable in an argument, and he was stubborn, and they were both people with strong opinions, and the combination occasionally produced evenings that were loud and pointed and resolved, eventually, with the kind of honesty that comes from two people who have committed to not leaving things unspoken. He was occasionally too cautious, in her view, waiting for certainty before acting. She was occasionally too independent, in his view, taking on responsibilities that she did not have to carry alone. Both things were true, and both things were, in their way, exactly what the other person loved about them. On the occasions when a case at the district attorney's office touched on something that brought the darker parts of her past close to the surface, and it happened, because the territory was what it was and Caldwell was not the only Caldwell in the world. She was sometimes quiet and tight-jawed for days at a time, working through it internally. He had learned not to push. He had learned to simply be present, to make the kitchen warm and the house quiet, and to let her find her way back on her own terms, and to be there when she did. He understood this because he had his own version of it, the cases that went wrong, the ones where the law was not enough, the accumulated weight of all the darkness he had watched in 11 years and was still, in different ways, watching. On those evenings she would come and sit beside him on the porch in the last of the light, and she would not say much, but she would be there, solid and real, and the weight would shift from impossible to manageable, which was all either of them had ever asked. Thomas grew. He was a serious boy, curious about everything, who had his mother's precision and his father's patience, and a stubborn streak that both his parents recognized from the inside. By the time he was 3, he had strong opinions about which stories were interesting and which were not, and he articulated those opinions with a clarity that made Calhoun's clerk, who met him once at the office, say to Edna, "Your son is going to be a lawyer or a judge." "I hope he is whatever he wants to be," Edna said, which was the right answer, and she knew it. In the spring of 1887, when Thomas was nearly 2 and the limestone house had been repainted, and the kitchen garden was the best it had ever been, Edna told Isaac over the same kitchen table where she had told him about Thomas that she was expecting again. He looked at her with the same expression he had had the first time, the one that had not been practiced. "Happy?" she asked. "Extremely," he said. "You?" She looked out the kitchen window at the morning and then back at him. "Yes," she said. "Also terrified, also yes, both things." "Both things can be true at once," he said with great deliberateness. She laughed. The real one, free and unguarded, the one he had been collecting since a canyon in September 1883. "You have been waiting 3 years to use that," she said. "Longer than that," he admitted. Their second child was a girl, born in December of 1887, and she arrived with considerably less drama than Thomas and an immediate determination to be loud about her preferences, which suggested, Isaac thought, that she would not have difficulty being heard in whatever room she eventually occupied. Edna named her Frances, after her own mother. Isaac held Frances for the first time with the same awe he had held Thomas, but different, the same miracle, a different person, and the specificity of her already apparent in the way she looked back at him with Edna's dark eyes and a completely new expression that was entirely her own. Thomas, at 2.5, regarded his sister with the cautious scientific interest of someone encountering a phenomenon that has not yet revealed its full implications. He sat beside her on the bed and touched her tiny hand very carefully and then looked up at his mother and said, "When will she be able to talk?" "In a while," Edna said. "I have things to discuss with her," Thomas said seriously. Isaac had to leave the room. Clara came again, of course, and this time Robert came with her, and the house was full for 2 weeks of the particular organized chaos of multiple generations overlapping, children underfoot and adults talking over their heads and the kitchen in constant production. And it was loud and warm and everything that both Isaac and Edna had been building toward, whether they had known it at the time or not. On the last evening of Clara's visit, after the children were in bed and Robert had fallen asleep in the armchair, and Clara was helping Edna in the kitchen and Isaac was on the porch in the December cold, Clara came out to stand with him. "She is happy," Clara said. "Not a question." "I believe she is," he said. "She was never unhappy," Clara said carefully. "She was competent and careful and doing what needed doing, but she was contained, like something waiting to have room enough." She paused. "You gave her room." Isaac thought about this. "She gave herself room," he said. "She had been building it before I arrived. I just happened to show up at the right time." Clara looked at him in the lamplight from the window. "You showed up," she said. "That counted." He looked through the window at Edna, who was laughing at something she had said herself. Her head tilted back, dark hair loose around her shoulders, the lamplight making everything gold. He had the same feeling he had had every day for 4 years, the feeling of being exactly where he was supposed to be. "Yes," he said, "I suppose it did." Summer came in 1888, slow and abundant. The practice had grown enough that Isaac had taken on a junior partner, a young man named Dalton who had studied in Austin and had the earnestness of someone at the beginning of a vocation rather than a career, which Isaac appreciated. He spent less time on the difficult cases and more time on the ones that built something: property arrangements, business agreements, the steady legal architecture of a town that was growing and needed the work done carefully. Edna, working with Calhoun, had by this time been responsible for building a systematic approach to case documentation that the district attorney had been arguing should be adopted countywide. Calhoun was a man not given to lavish credit assignment, but he told Isaac privately, at a dinner that had nothing to do with official business, that Edna Grady Norris had more effect on the reliability of the law in Kinney County than most men twice her age, and that he intended to make sure the right people understood that. Isaac thanked him, because it was true and it deserved to be acknowledged, and because Edna herself would not have said it about herself and someone needed to say it. Thomas started school that September, which produced the first morning of his life when he was not immediately confident about the plan. He stood at the door in the early morning with his hat in his hands and looked at his father and said, "What if I do not know the things they know?" "Then you will learn them," Isaac said. "What if I say the wrong thing?" "Then you will learn the right thing." He crouched down to Thomas's level. "I will tell you what someone very smart told me once. The strength does not go away just because you are uncertain about using it. It is still there." Thomas thought about this with the gravity of a 5-year-old confronting metaphysics. "Mama said that," he said. "Yes," Isaac agreed. "She did." Thomas put his hat on. "All right," he said, and walked to school. The years moved the way years do when you are living in them rather than watching them quickly in retrospect, fully in the moment, each day substantial and the accumulation of them, a kind of richness that is only visible from a certain distance. By 1890, Isaac Norris was the most sought-after attorney in Kinney and 3 adjacent counties. By 1891, Edna had been formally titled as investigative supervisor for the Kinney County District Attorney's Office, the first woman to hold any formal supervisory title in the legal apparatus of the region, a fact that Calhoun announced at a meeting with the careful casualness of someone placing a stone that will hold weight for a long time. There were people who objected. It was the kind of objection that comes from discomfort with change wrapped in the language of tradition, and Edna addressed it in the way she addressed all challenges, with documentation, with the work itself, with the quiet persistence of someone who is not asking for permission so much as establishing a fact. Thomas, at 7, understood that his mother did important work and was proud of it in the abstract, uncomplicated way of a child who has not yet learned that pride in a parent is supposed to have conditions. Frances, at 4, was at the stage of wanting to accompany her mother everywhere and being occasionally successful at this, particularly when Calhoun had been worn down by a difficult morning and lacked the resources to object. The corner cabin at Redrock Hollow had long since been abandoned, the 2 old wagon roads that met at its junction now barely used, the stone walls slowly being reclaimed by cedar. Isaac rode past it once in the autumn of 1891 on the way back from a case in Bracketville. He stopped his horse and looked at it for a long moment. He thought about a woman with a rifle across her knees in lamplight. He thought about 2 hours of careful truth-telling in a dark cabin. He thought about a canyon campfire and a book of Emerson in a saddlebag and coffee that was a form of respect, and the particular sound of her voice saying his name for the first time. Nobody had warned him. Captain Webb, in all his careful preparatory advice, had not warned him that the woman in the corner cabin would be so hard to forget. Had not warned him, more accurately, that forgetting her would become not just impossible but incomprehensible, that she would become so much a part of the landscape of his life that the idea of not knowing her was the same as the idea of not knowing himself. He looked at the cabin for a long time in the autumn afternoon. Then he turned his horse toward Uvalde and rode home. She was on the porch when he arrived in the long evening light, with a file open across her knees and Frances asleep against her side, and Thomas doing something in the kitchen garden that involved a great deal of earnest digging. She looked up when he rode in, and the look she gave him was the one she had been giving him for 8 years, steady and certain and warm, with a warmth that had no performance in it, just the simple fact of a person glad to see you. He dismounted and came up the porch steps and bent to kiss her forehead carefully so as not to wake Frances. "How was Bracketville?" she said. "Resolved," he said, with more difficulty than it deserved. "How was today?" "Good," she said, and showed him a page in the file. Calhoun approved the county-wide protocol. "That is 4 years of work," he said. "Yes," she said, with satisfaction that was quiet and deep. "It is." He sat down beside her in the other porch chair, and she leaned her shoulder against his, and Frances slept on, and Thomas dug with great purpose in the garden, and the last of the evening settled gold and slow over the limestone hills, and the cedar smell of the air was clean and familiar and entirely, permanently theirs. A mockingbird in the cedar at the edge of the yard ran through its repertoire with the casual brilliance of a creature that has decided the evening deserves its best work, and the sound of it filled the quiet between them in the way that silence fills good rooms, completely and without apology. Edna closed the file and set it aside. She was looking at the hills in the way she sometimes did, the way of someone who is taking stock of a very good distance and being satisfied by it. "Isaac," she said. "Yes. Do you know what I thought about that first night when you came through the door with your gun drawn and I had mine on you?" He glanced at her. "I assumed you were thinking about whether to shoot me." "Before that," she said. "There was a half-second before I raised the rifle, when I heard the latch and saw the door open, and in that half-second I thought finally, not because I knew who it was, but because I had been alone so long and so frightened and so certain that nobody was coming, and something in me, before I had any information at all, thought finally, someone is here." Isaac was quiet for a moment. "And then you raised the rifle," he said. "And then I raised the rifle," she agreed, "because hope and caution are not mutually exclusive." He reached for her hand on the armrest between them, and she turned hers, and they held on in the way they had been holding on for 8 years, which was the way of people who know the ground is solid, because they built it together from uncertain country. "I came to Redrock Hollow," he said, "thinking I was going to secure some evidence and escort a reluctant witness. That was the assignment." "I know," she said. "Nobody told me I was going to find my whole life in a cabin in Kinney County." She turned to look at him, her dark eyes in the evening light, holding the warmth and the sharpness and the steadiness that he had been watching for 8 years and would watch for the rest of his life. "Is that what you found?" she said. "That is what I found," he said. "Every bit of it." Frances stirred against her side and made a small sound and settled back into sleep. Thomas emerged from the garden with muddy hands and the triumphant expression of someone who has achieved an objective and wanted credit for it. The mockingbird sang on. Edna looked at their children and their porch and the limestone hills going gold in the last of the light, and then she looked at Isaac, and the smile, the full one, the real one, the one he had been collecting since a September night in 1883, appeared and stayed. "Nobody warned me either," she said, "for what it is worth. Nobody warned me that the ranger who came through my door with a gun drawn would be the one person I would never be able to stop thinking about." "We were both underprepared," he said. "Completely," she agreed. "And now," she squeezed his hand, "and now we are exactly where we are supposed to be," she said, "which is the only place I ever wanted to get to." The evening held them there, on the porch of the limestone house in Uvalde, Texas, in the autumn of 1891, the children and the mockingbird and the cedar hills and the long warm last of the light, and everything that had started in a dark cabin with a gun between them had arrived, by the accumulation of all its honest and difficult and tender and stubborn moments, here whole and permanent and entirely, finally, home.